What I have found over the last 8 or 9 months in dealing with this issue is we have fewer practicing doctors and more doctors that follow protocols, which is entirely appropriate. I completely agree with practicing protocols, using random controlled trials. But there are moments in medicine, moments in our history where you have to allow doctors to practice medicine, to develop these therapies, and that's been the history, quite honestly, of the development of medicine. My final point is to talk about the bill I championed through Congress, Right to Try. Now, the current situation, for example, with hydroxychloroquine is not a prime example of Right to Try because hydroxychloroquine is a fully approved drug. What Right to Try says is if a drug has gone through the first 2 stages of FDA approval, so it's been proven safe, but it hasn't gone through the final efficacy approval. A patient and a doctor still have the right to try that if there are no other available treatments. Isn't that the position we're in early treatment of COVID? There's no other treatments. And yet doctors who've had the courage to practice medicine and try things like ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine have been scorned and worse. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. I'm glad there's a vaccine, but that vaccine will not be widely available for months. More people will get sick, more people will die. I, for one, am for allowing doctors to practice medicine, to treat patients compassionately as early as possible so they don't progress into the hospital and the intensive care unit. Senator Peter.
As we sit here today, we have the greatest mass of infected Americans that we've ever had since the start of the pandemic, and Americans are pouring into hospitals untreated. The hospital census is already at capacity. A national calamity of unimaginable mortality is right around the corner. In a matter of weeks to months, Americans are going to be horrified with what they see on the news with respect to a hospital overrun, mortality skyrocketing for both COVID and non-COVID complications and conditions, and patients further infecting other Americans as this pandemic spirals out of control. My viewpoint and my views expressed here are those of my own and not necessarily my institutions. My viewpoint is this pandemic should have always been viewed as having 4 pillars. If we can bring up the figure. The first pillar is contagion control. We have had probably the vast majority of government efforts solely focused on contagion control. The entire media representation of what the government has been doing has been on contagion control. Well, as we sit here today, it's obvious contagion control has not solved the problem. The second pillar is early ambulatory treatment. This virus infects individuals and they sit at home for 2 weeks. We have a 2-week opportunity to treat this problem, and we hear nothing about it. We hear nothing about early ambulatory treatment. There's no updates. There's no viewpoint to Americans of what's going on outside of the United States, where early ambulatory treatment is a standard of care in countries that are doing much better than the United States. It's grossly overlooked. The third pillar is the hospitals, and I've already told you they're overrun. We're doing all the best technologies we possibly can in the hospital, but the hospital's an inadequate safety net. The current hospital mortality rate's about 5 to 7%. When patients get in the ICU, it's 25%. And virtually all the COVID deaths that occur in the hospital. It's obviously not an adequate safety net for Americans. The fourth pillar is vaccination. Vaccination should bring out the close to the pandemic. But this hearing is about early ambulatory treatment. So I can tell you right now, I'm not asking for permission to do this, but I'm asking for your help. I'm asking for the government to organize all government agencies that are related to this to assist doctors rapidly with their innovation and their compassionate care of patients with COVID-19 at home, because we can prevent hospitalization and death, and right now it's the only option on the table. Thank you.
So now we've spent the last 6 months with formal government policies and warnings against outpatient treatment. The government has invested very large amounts in vaccines and expensive new treatments, which have yet to be proven, while there's been almost no support for evaluating inexpensive but useful medications. 250,000 Americans have died from this mismanaged approach. And even if we find that the vaccines eventually work effectively and safely, as we all hope, myself included, people will still get sick and die, and early outpatient treatment is still and will be continuing an essential part of ending this pandemic.
Over 25,000 fearful people were screened. Over 2,400 were COVID-19 positive, and we treated successfully over 1,000 high-risk and symptomatic ones. The interesting thing to me is that Dr. Tyson and I independently came to the same protocol for that purpose back in March. And we based it upon the great work from Dr. Zelenko and Dr. Raoult, actually. They're our heroes, actually. It was a triple hydroxychloroquine cocktail, HCQ, 3,200 milligrams over 5 days, azithromycin or doxycycline, and especially zinc, which is often left out in the studies.
As you've heard, we are entering the most difficult days of this pandemic. And so I am so pleased that the committee has met to discuss the value of outpatient therapies. But I have to be honest, given the dismal failure of hydroxychloroquine to date, there is little scientific basis to think it will be effective for anybody. And at this point in the pandemic, with so much suffering and death, we should focus our efforts on promising approaches to help Americans get through this crisis. Thank you.
Obviously, we have a huge disconnect between testimony here, between experts, Harvard and Yale educated doctors and PhDs.
I think Dr. Xi's testimony is reckless and dangerous for the nation. You're interested in misinformation regarding COVID. That report in the middle of the pandemic, when hydroxychloroquine early on was appropriately used, that first wave of the pandemic, that's what kept it from skyrocketing. Hydroxychloroquine was widely used early on. That's what kept the March, April, May curve down. Believe me, when I got that test result, I was terrified. And every American is terrified. Every older patient with heart and lung disease, when they get the report, they're not falsely reassured and sit at home, think this is going to be a picnic. They are scared to death. And by the time they come to the hospital, it is frank terror because they know they're going to be isolated. They'll never see their family members again. What did I do? I did the right thing. I got myself rapidly into a FDA approved treatment protocol through a study. Hard to do, by the way, because the government offers no resources to the public to quickly get into clinical trials. I got into a clinical trial. I took hydroxychloroquine as part of a multi-drug sequenced program, which is exactly what's in the peer-reviewed literature, which is the framework of how Americans should be treated. Well, I was a few days behind in recognizing what was going on. The virus got into my lungs. I had pulmonary involvement, and I got anxious. I got to the point where I thought maybe I could be hospitalized. And I can tell you firsthand, this cocktail of drugs works for sure, but hydroxychloroquine, dose by dose, settles down that fever, settles down, reduces the amount of the severity, intensity of symptoms, and by that mechanism, that's the reason why hydroxychloroquine reduces hospitalizations and death. When patients get anxious and they can't breathe anymore, they go to the hospital. So this isn't complicated. There's over 100 studies. They are all supportive. The EUA says when the preponderance of evidence shows the drug works and has acceptable safety, we ought to go. My view is we need to go with this on everybody high risk in America.
Dr. Risch, when you listen to Dr. Jahai, sounds very authoritative. Do you have a response?
And there's no doubt that there are plenty of hospital studies, and some of those hospital studies indeed show no benefit, if not harm. And there are reasons for that, and I don't want to get into the technical issues of these studies, but just to say it's irrelevant. Studies of hospital patients are irrelevant. We are considering outpatient disease and outpatient treatment that starts in the first 5 days.
Say that, I've heard it now said repeatedly that we've got to convince the American public that the vaccines are safe. I don't recall anybody on my side of the aisle questioning the safety of the vaccine process. That seems to have been coming from elected officials on the other side of the aisle in your presidential and vice presidential candidates. So if we have to repair the damage of the credibility of people's confidence in the vaccine, it's not because of what Republicans have said. I'm sorry to say partisans, what folks on your side of the aisle said.
Senators, listening to that last exchange of questions and answers, I want my testimony to be clear. This entire hearing was about early treatment. And what those last set of exchanges showed, a complete lack of focus. It went over to the vaccine, and then now wandered over to wearing masks, and even what's being offered at the Thanksgiving dinner. One of the reasons why America is failing colossally in handling the pandemic is a lack of focus exemplified by the last series of exchanges. We're building up to mass panic in the United States. I don't hear a sense of urgency on this committee call at all. We are weeks away from mass panic and massive mortality. People are talking about Thanksgiving dinner. Come on, there are so many infected people now. Labs are hitting 20% positive rates. That means the number of people coming to the lab that are testing positive is 20%. And the average person infects many more people. This is a massive calamity that's right around the corner. And I'm pleading for the Senate in America right now, in between administrations, which is a very vulnerable time, to not absolutely get clobbered with a tsunami of mortality, particularly for our elder citizens.
I've been pushing early intervention, early treatment, whatever it is, whatever works, because to me that was going to always be the key component of ending this COVID crisis, and we've ignored it. And it's baffled me, and I'll just point out again, maybe part of the reason is the hydroxychloroquine cocktail. It's about $20, right? Certainly no more than $50. Remdesivir, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in terms of the side effects of that, and the studies, the science behind that, costs over $3,000. Could that maybe be one of the reasons why all the effort is put on these more exotic therapeutics that cost thousands of dollars versus something that's off the shelf that costs $20? Something to consider. 50% or five-fold reduction in death and hospitalization versus the almost infinitesimal risk of hydroxychloroquine and zinc? This has made no sense to me whatsoever. The only explanation is the politicization of it, which I opened up my opening comments saying that has been what's such a shame. That's what poisoned the well. That's what created what I've called the prescription logjam here on hydroxychloroquine or early, and I think it affected all early treatment options. It took them off the table. We took our eye off the ball. That's why I say our agencies failed us. These individuals in these agencies failed us.
This is not just a government culpability and malfeasance with respect to hydroxychloroquine. This is academic malfeasance. There were two fraudulent papers, one in the New England Journal of Medicine, one in Lancet, published by individuals interested in doing evil to the world with respect to a beneficial treatment of hydroxychloroquine. In an unprecedented manner, these two manuscripts were withdrawn after 2 weeks where they could scare the public and the world's physician audience. Since that time, there have been dozens of fraudulent papers.
Re-emphasize that. They were then withdrawn.
They were withdrawn, and the New England Journal of Medicine and Lancet acknowledged that they were fraudulent papers. They were scare papers to scare people on hydroxychloroquine. Since that time, there's been dozens of pile-on scare tactics in academics. This isn't the government. This is people in my field, in academic medicine, who are committing academic fraud. I reviewed a paper. I'm a cardiologist. I reviewed a paper that made it into the medical literature demonstrating that hydroxychloroquine causes a heart attack, that hydroxychloroquine causes a giant scar in the heart. And I can tell you, I'm at Baylor in Dallas. We have the world's most recognized cardiac pathology program in the world. Our senior examiner has held in his hands, more human hearts than anybody in the history of mankind. I can tell you firsthand, hydroxychloroquine does not cause giant scars in the heart. So academic medicine is committing a fraud, is committing, I think, a crime against humanity. There must be a motivation behind this that's much bigger than just Democrat versus Republican. I am extremely concerned, honestly, about the academic contribution to scare tactics in the world. Now, it's not working everywhere. In India, it's given first line. And India is such a crowded country. I've been there myself. Their deaths per million population is a tiny fraction of America. If you're in Greece right now,
isn't it 95 versus over 700?
Yeah, so we have...
And they're using hydroxychloroquine.
Right, we have nearly 800 deaths per million population in the United States, and we're all spread out. In India, they're on top of each other. They have less than 100 deaths per million population. The leading doctor in India is willing to come testify to the United States and tell you the reason why. They have tons of COVID. It's spreading over like crazy, but they're treating it at home with hydroxychloroquine and other drugs. Remember, it's a multi-drug program, probably about four or so drugs plus supplements, and they've handled the infection. Greece, Everyone's been traveled in Europe. Greece is not a third world country. First line, you're given hydroxychloroquine. Okay, we've missed the ball. There's 30 countries that have approved an oral version of remdesivir called favipiravir. 30 countries, including Japan. Every country that is actually having a reasonable public health response is treating this problem at home. Now, none of these drugs are a cure, but they allow the patient to get through the illness. Like myself, I missed 10 days off of work and I returned to the workforce. I didn't get in the hospital for 4 weeks. They allow people to stay at home and not go out and contaminate other people. My wife and I got it at the same time, and because we were treated at home, we were actually able to stay at home so we didn't contaminate other people. The current program that's supported by the Minority Witness and the National Institutes of Health and all government bodies is that patients go home, they get no help whatsoever, doctors are not supposed to treat them, they go out in a panic to urgent cares and ERs, contaminate more people, and then they're hospitalized and die. America has to wake up right here, right now. We are getting buried, and we need home treatment.
We've got Dr. McCulloch, again, Vice Chair of Medicine at Baylor, I believe Harvard trained. Dr. Harvey Risch, trained at Yale. Dr. Freed, Harvard trained. Completely different assessment of literatures and study versus what you're talking about, and you say it with a great deal of authority. Well, let me first, what is your opinion of these three gentlemen in front of us, these three doctors? I mean, this is not pejorative to you three gentlemen. Do you think they're just idiots?
Senator Johnson,
again, you are very authoritative and completely refuting what these three gentlemen are talking about. I mean, this is the disconnect, and this is what America needs to evaluate. Okay?
Yeah.
So tell me what your opinion of these three gentlemen are here.
Yeah. So, Senator Johnson, I don't know these three gentlemen. They're all clearly well qualified. They're clearly smart, and I believe they're all clearly committed to the right issues. I have no reasons to doubt any of that. My problem here is not so much that we have a differing reading of the literature, which we clearly do. It is this idea that there is this broad conspiracy across hundreds of thousands of doctors, the NIH, the CDC, all academic institutions, the Infectious Disease Society of America. We're all in on this conspiracy to prevent Americans from getting a life-saving therapy.
Quit using that word.
Okay, fair enough.
Something has happened where we have not devoted any time or energy or resources to doing what could have stopped this COVID crisis very quickly, and that's called early intervention, early treatment. Okay.
Yeah. So Senator, I agree, and I will not use the word conspiracy, and I apologize if that was at all offensive. I didn't mean it to be.
I got it. So that's disputed. In your testimony, you came up, and I'm telling you, this is, I would consider disinformation and scare tactic, 93% increase in reports of poisoning. And then you heard what Dr. McCulloch talked about. We're talking about out of about 500,000 people that took hydroxychloroquine, another 77 called in, and about 2/3 of that was because they thought they maybe took an extra dose and they were concerned about it. So again, you use a scare tactic of saying 93% increase in poison of hydroxychloroquine when it's not even, it's an infinitesimal impact, but it's an enormous, and I would call it disinformation impact in terms of your communication.
I think we should focus on the fact that the evidence so far is very clear that this therapy doesn't work. If future data show that it does, I will be delighted and be the first to promote it, but I've got to be driven by the data and the science and not what I hope is to be true.
Well, again, there's a real dispute by the 4 members of this panel. I realize I selected 3 and Senator Peters selected you, but there's a real dispute. And by the way, these aren't the only 3 people that take a look at the potential risk-reward ratio here. Take a look at the observational success, the firsthand knowledge of treating people with success, and realize, really the risk-reward ratio would be in favor of give it a shot. And let me make this point, and then I'll turn it over to Senator Peters. I see he's back on screen here. I think me, as a human being, as an American citizen, with the freedom, with a bill that I helped pass now, Right to Try, should have the right to access this without the interference of bureaucrats in the CDC, NIH, and the FDA. And that is exactly what's happened. I can't get it. Millions of Americans can't access it because of the disinformation, the scaremongering, and the prescription logjam that has been created by bureaucrats. So you can sit back and go, oh, but it hasn't been proven effective. Well, they've never pushed trials to really analyze it. And I've got some pretty eminent people in front of me that have looked at the observational data and completely dispute that.
Could we get better data? Absolutely. And so, Senator, I would love it if you would push for better quality randomized trials.
By the way, I have, and they wouldn't do it. Okay, I've had a direct pipeline to Dr. Hahn, and I cannot get them to do it, which again begs the question, why not? That's why I say this has been an enormous dereliction. And again, what I would say, you can maybe turn to those different places, but as a patient myself, I wanted to get a hydroxychloroquine and I couldn't get it. Okay? I think I should have the right to try in dealing with my doctor who I trust. I'm sorry, more than some of these people who are so outside the circle of empathy, and for whatever reason, again, I'm sorry, it's just me. I question the fact that because this cocktail costs about $20 and remdesivir costs $3,000, that maybe there's a little bias, maybe there's a little conflict, maybe there's a little agenda that's outside of really what's treating a patient when you're in the ivory tower and you're not dealing with sick and dying and ventilated patients.
I just had a patient die last week, receive remdesivir. The difficulty is it's too toxic. It causes liver toxicity. He had liver toxicity, can't get through the 5-dose administration, and the drug is administered too late. The problem is the virus was replicating 2 weeks ago. By the time that he got into the hospital, the virus has already done its job. So it's a fool's errand to test a single drug like remdesivir late in the illness. This is no different than HIV. We need multiple drugs early up front. The NIH and biopharmaceuticals right now have delivered 0 oral medications to doctors in practice. 0. That's our batting average right now. So for all the science we've put into this as a country with the greatest pharmaceutical companies in the world, 0 oral drugs for the next patient who gets sick with COVID-19. Listen, we're at a crisis. We need both the art and the science of medicine. What these doctors are telling you and what the real world evidence is telling you is that patients using a sequenced multi-drug approach at home is the only chance to reduce hospitalization. Remdesivir doesn't prevent a hospitalization because you have to be in the hospital to get it.
So I want to talk a little bit about the practice of medicine versus following protocols, which I think we all agree. I mean, if you've got a scientifically based random controlled trial, protocol on treating people, you do it. But not every human body is the same. Not every person's the same, and they don't all react to those protocols, correct? So at that point in time, even with a well-established protocol, doctors have to shift to the art and practice of medicine, correct?
That's so important, particularly when you're on the front line. It was a war. We were at war in this pandemic, and my colleague Dr. Brian Tyson and I took an aggressive approach, and it implied using the art of medicine, of what we'd been, or the principles that we'd learned. And I learned those principles 50 years ago, and I was lucky to have gone to Harvard. I wonder if Dr. Jha actually treats patients, actually the way he talks.
Have you treated any COVID patients?
I have not, sir.
Okay.
To show you how off kilter the world is, in Queensland, Australia, a doctor will be put in jail for prescribing hydroxychloroquine. To show you how, and if you go over to India, they're going to give it to you right away. In Greece, they're going to give it to you right. It's in their guidelines. In Greece,
it's over the counter in some countries,
but my point is, we're all the way from, they give it first line in their guidelines. The Greek guidelines give hydroxychloroquine, but in Queensland, you get put in jail. In the United States, we're caught up in this flurry of data and confusion. Something is going very wrong in this world.
I was contacted by a doctor who I think had written 4 prescriptions for hydroxychloroquine, 4. And she was issued a grand jury subpoena by the Homeland Security Investigation Department, if you can believe that. A doctor prescribing an approved drug, and she gets a grand jury subpoena. Something's not right about that, okay? Now, because I checked into it, they withdrew that subpoena. But there's something that has gone wrong here. There's something that is not right. And I, for one, intend to get to the bottom of it. So again, gentlemen, all of you, Dr. Zhao, all of you, thank you for being doctors. And I mean that sincerely. People who have dedicated your lives to help save other people's lives. It's something to be celebrated. It's not, you shouldn't be persecuted because you're trying to save lives, because for whatever reason there's been some politicization of a particular drug that's been around for 65 years. I mean, there's something wrong here. But I want to thank all of you for being doctors. I want to thank you for your testimony. I hope people pay attention to this hearing. Again, I'm not pushing one drug over the other. What I'm pushing for is robust studies and investigation into early treatment of COVID so we can prevent deaths, we can prevent hospitalization. Yeah, I'm for letting doctors be doctors and practice medicine and have the courage when there's no other option. And let's face it, right now, for early treatment, there's no other option. I think it is inhumane to basically tell somebody who is fearful, and justifiably so, I test positive for COVID. Is my oxygen level going to drop below 94? Can I do nothing to try and prevent that? I can't try a drug that's been prescribed for 65 years. I don't have the right to do that in some states. I just think that's unconscionable. It makes no sense. The risk-reward ratio is so in favor of giving these things a shot. When I had tested positive because I had one episode of AFib, my cardiologist talked me out of using hydroxychloroquine. And so I used quercetin instead, with zinc, with vitamin D, with vitamin C. I never developed a symptom. Now, maybe I'm just one of those lucky 40% that never did. I will tell you one thing, though. Had I developed symptoms, I would have found a doctor. I might have called up one of you, and I would have tried hydroxychloroquine. From what I know, I think the risk is so unbelievably low, even though I have AFib. I would have tried it because I don't want to go in the hospital. I think most Americans, if they know about things, if they think rationally about things, are going to want some type of treatment. So again, with that, I just want to thank all of you for being doctors, for putting yourself in the line, because you will be criticized. I will be criticized. We're going to be raked over the social media. We'll probably be censored. I know, Dr. McCulloch, you already have been censored. I mean, your video describing what you did as part of a trial was pulled off of YouTube, and we helped you get back on YouTube. There is something going on here. I hope the American public listens. I hope they pay attention. And I hope we end up developing early treatment for COVID so we can get this behind us. We're all sick of it. We want cures, we want therapies, we want the vaccine, but we can't wait for the vaccine. We've got to take action now. So again, thank you all.